everybody, and welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where we know The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 5. My name is Mike Bloom, and they say sometimes when you spend 2 days in a spot, it feels like an eternity. And even though we are only on day 2 in Seattle, believe it or not, we just passed the third to last episode of this season. Only a couple left, and we're going to talk about couples in many ways on today's recap. Now, unfortunately, due to some scheduling issues, Grace Leeder was not able to join me for the recap this week. Don't worry, her and Taran will be back together for the deep dive coming out in the next couple days, in which case I'm sure Grace will be able to give her thoughts there about the episode. But I am so excited to welcome this person in. She is showing up to swoop into my rescue, much like Jessie in this episode. You can listen to her thoughts every week on The Last of Us over on the Look for the Light podcast, but I'm excited to bring her over right now into the thicketed forest that is We Know The Last of Us. It's Jess Sterling. Hi, Jess.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here, namely on an episode where Jesse has reappeared because I love Jesse so much. And I'm so excited he's back with his really beefy arms to save the day.
Okay, I was going to say, you and Dena might have at least one thing in common then, considering the Jesse thirst, or at least was briefly there for Dena. Maybe a
hmm
bit more of a permanent fixture for you.
Oh, certainly. Listen, the arm, the hammering, the what is it, axing gifts on repeat in my household. Him swinging an axe. Just come on, chef's kiss. Mwah. Love Jesse.
Well, let's talk about, Ellie and some of these characters, maybe not taking an axe, but certainly taking a blunt instrument to some of these wolves in this episode, as well as getting to really, I think, push things forward. It's interesting because I wouldn't necessarily call this a filler episode. Of course, that is a very loaded term. I would call this more so a setup episode, which is very interesting considering how we're going to end things. We'll get to that in a little bit. But, it does feel like last episode, we arrived in Seattle. We got introduced to Isaac. We got a really nice setting of where we are, what the stakes are, and also, very big character moment for Dena. And that sort of continues on in this episode where our main characters are going to push forward with their big goal of picking off the WLF as their sort of tete-a-tete of revenge continues. And then we get, some lore or spore building, if you will, as well, that gets brought in too as more of an existential threat. But I'm intrigued from your perspective, Jess. Again, you've been covering this show week in and week out. But for the uninitiated, what have been your thoughts about season 2 so far? And how do your feelings about episode 5 play into or against that?
I would say overall, I'm pretty pleased with how the season is going.
Hmm.
I've been a bit of a harsh critic on some of the changes they've made in adapting the show from video game to screen. Some make a ton of sense. I would point to Dina and Joel being, together on a mission, and that's kind of when everything goes down. But the stuff last week with the I'm pregnant, now let's make out didn't really work for me, but this episode I felt like was really, really great. Like it was a shorter episode, but
Mm-hmm.
no wasted time. And last week, knowing that we were going into this episode where they would explore the spores and kind of, in a way that we would have thought would have been last episode, I really liked what they did this episode with the spores. I actually think, on retrospect it works for me that they put it in this episode. And it's, first of all, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, it's disgusting, but it's beautiful the way they capture it on the screen.
There's beauty in disgust. I think a lot of
Yeah.
HBO Sunday lineup shows have taught us that.
Yes, yeah. And so this episode really worked for me. I love how much of Dina we're getting and how much they're exploring the character of Dina. I was a little concerned coming into the season that, given we only had 7 episodes, like how much are they really going to be giving us of her? And they're killing it. She is so smart. One of my favorite characters in the video game, and certainly that's true of the television show as well. I love getting to see the back and forth with her and Ellie, where she is the strategist. She is the logical one who says, hey, let's not shoot our guns, okay? Let's holster them. We have knives. We're running or we're knifing, and that's it. And Ellie says, of course. 5 seconds in, gunshots fired, like It's beautiful. The way they're doing it is incredible, and I really liked this episode. I think it's setting us up for some really fun, final 2 episodes.
Yeah, it's really weird to say because again, this is the third to last episode of the season, but like I think it officially dawned on me. Oh yeah, Dina's probably my favorite character of season 2. And
Yeah.
if it's a hot take, I'd probably put that above Joel and Ellie, who like are deliciously complicated characters in and of themselves. But the more we find out about her and the more we get to see Isabella Merced truly shine, the happier I am. And we got to see a lot of her, both past, present, and maybe future, in many different ways in this episode. I think what has been really working for me in this episode was able to highlight some of that is that, Grace and I spoke about this, that one of the downsides of doing this big time jump and introducing this character and then doing this big thing where they kill off Joel is like, I feel like they have done a pretty good job in the fits and starts they have had of like showcasing this Dena Ellie relationship and how, yeah, maybe it is a little abrupt that they're like, oh my God, she's pregnant, and now they're making out and they're in love. They'll declare their love for each other in this episode. But A, teenagers, all caps, underline, italicized, bold. And
Yeah.
B, I feel like this episode is doing now a good job of like, I wouldn't even say backfilling because we're still in the moment, but I think showcasing a bit more of that dynamic and how it works so well. To your point, the fact that she is a little bit more of like the street smart, I know how to triangulate positions, whereas Ellie is, or book smart, I should say. Well, Ellie is more of the street smart, like, yeah, I can't be bitten, so I'm going to serve as bait time and time again, and you get away. Like, to see how their dynamics both fit those roles and then somewhat shift. To your point about like they go in the warehouse, Dena has a plan, it all goes awry. Ellie is the one to come through with the tactics at the end of the day. Or even just like the little exchanges, like when they go inside the warehouse and Dena asks, how's it look? And Ellie says, haunted but empty. And Dena just deadpans, oh, just like us. True. I don't know if they're Gen Z at this point, Jess. I guess they are, considering that they were born in like 2000, about like 2000, the mid 2000s or so. But feels like that type of humor has carried through, even if a lot of tenets of pop culture have been frozen in 2003.
Yeah, certainly. I think you're right. I think the problem with us only having 7 episodes with these characters, and not even all these episodes are necessarily focused on Dena and Ellie and their relationship and how it's growing. Obviously a video game allows you to have a bit more time with that, but I do think we are seeing how they operate as a couple and why they're just so successful as a couple, and
Hmm.
it's because they do have different tactics and they balance each other out very well. And I think this episode also really showcases why Ellie being alone and kind of using her own devices is extremely dangerous, because she is very reckless and she's fueled by one thing and one thing only, and it's revenge. And
Yep.
so without someone like Dena to keep her in check and to say, Ellie, we need to slow down. We need to make a plan because we're going to get ourselves killed if we just go in guns blazing. Well, that all falls away when Dina's not next to Ellie whispering that in her ear. Ellie is going to be the one full throttle, doesn't care, fueled by one thing, and that's revenge. And like it just I think they're doing a really great job at showing how dangerous Ellie is, and that, like, again, these characters are so complex. They're the most morally gray you could possibly be, and I like that we're also getting a bit more of Dina's backstory into, like, why she is the way she is. I wasn't expecting, like, to go back to the question of, like, "Who's your first kill?" I was never expecting for us to get an answer from
Yeah,
Dina
do
on
you, do you
that.
think that do you think that's the icebreaker in this post-apocalyptic wasteland? You think everyone's just kind of throwing that out at like communal events or these corporate mixers where people don't really know what to say?
Yeah. Yeah, in MASH, there's now a category of, like, first kill, instead of first
Well,
car.
that makes things really awkward when people like list off the other ones in the room of like, okay, well, you better hope you're crossed off that list in more ways than one.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's complicated. Obviously, if someone is alive in this world, especially if they're around Ellie or Dina's age, they've probably seen something. They've probably experienced some really difficult thing in their life. And so to find out from Dina that, like, she feels partly responsible for the death of her sister and mother, and that she feels about how Ellie feels about Abby, about this man had he escaped, from her grasps. She would have done anything to take him out. I think it gives us not only a better explanation for why Dena is on this mission with Ellie, but just another way in which Dena and Ellie connect with one another and kind of fuel each other. Throwing Jesse into the mix though, Mike, I think if we're gonna call Dena the logician, right? Like she is the most logic based between Ellie and Dena. Jesse feels like what is it? Lawful neutral in
Yeah.
D&D terms, you know? Like he's like the paladin. Like he's like big strong guy that follows the rules. So like gosh, throwing him into the mix is really going to complicate things.
Yeah, but considering that his MO was basically him dropping in being like, all right, good thing I rescued you two. Now we're just going to go back home and reset like everything is normal. You could tell he's desperately seeking that sense of normalcy. It's something we even got represented in the form of Jackson a couple episodes ago during that vote as to whether they were going to send people out. But I want to shift back to Dena for a second because, yeah, this was such a I mean, again, I don't know if I want to say surprising turn. I mean, I certainly didn't expect it as someone who really does not remember much about the second game, but looking at the fact that as focused as we have been on all the new in the past couple episodes, right? The new setting, the new characters, what's a WLF, what's a Seraphite, all this type of stuff. We have to remember the mission at hand, and it gets sort of introduced or reintroduced in the form of Ellie happening to find, guess the last concert that was ever played in Seattle and this impressive array of guitars. And, she plays one line of Pearl Jam. And I don't know if it's because she got so verklempt or if it's because Eddie Vedder threatened to sue if they sung anymore. But appropriately, the song was called If I Ever Were to Lose You. And I think for her, that moment and that song, my assumption is that it's very Joel loaded, right? Joel was assumingly the one that kind of taught her his catalog of music, why she's so into songs from the 80s and the 90s, talk about moments that are frozen in time. And specifically, that lyric kind of just like removes all the air from her lungs, right? Like that's the equivalent of the Spores to the other people, is that she's like, oh, this is kind of when the reality of the situation hits her in multiple ways. To the point that when Dena comes in, after she just like silently puts the guitar away and says, oh, I found them, Ellie just like confidently looks at her, tight lipped and says, good. And you could tell that she really has focused herself in the throes of a very romantically torrid situation back to like, okay, shit, I know what I'm here to do. And to your point again about how on paper Dena would be the cooler head here, the one to be like, all right, let's not go in literally guns a-blazing. She showcases to Ellie why she joined her on this mission in the first place, about this idea that, her past, the biggest loss that she experienced in her life was fueled by sort of like this eye for an eye mentality, that she feels like she had to be the one to morally and literally get the blood on her hands to not only satisfy sort of her own immediate whim to get revenge for the loss of her mother and sister, but also almost from an altruistic perspective, right? Of like, well, if I let him get away, who knows how many other people would have done it. And that's very understandable, especially to your point, coming from a very a growing mind, I should say, still kind of working itself out. It's a very tough thing to do at the age that Dena was, especially to like outright take the life of a person, let alone in such a traumatizing situation. And Dena will then kind of follow that up by being like, listen, you can let me stay, you can let me go. There's no right answer. And there's no right answer is really kind of like, to me, just the subtitle of The Last of Us, which is
Oh yeah.
like, there are pros and cons to every decision you make, especially when human lives are on the line. But I found it a really fantastic shade of Dena's character that we got to explore of like, yeah, she is probably the brain to Ellie's gut, but at the same time, she is someone that does devoutly believe in Ellie's perspective that she espouses in that speech at Town Hall of like, these people deserve justice against them for what they did. Whatever Joel did was not nearly worth the punishment was not befitting of the crime, in a manner of speaking.
Yeah, and interestingly, I think it's interesting she says that so confidently being that she doesn't really know what he did, right? Like, she feels like she
And that
knows
Ellie
Joel.
assumingly does, as we'll talk about later on.
Right. And so Dina feels very confidently that there's nothing Joel could have done that would be deserving of the ending that he got. And it's really interesting that she says that with just so much confidence because, if we're looking at Ellie as Joel's surrogate daughter, I think the next closest person to him beyond Tommy, obviously, would be Dina. And so Dina feels like she really knew who Joel was. And I think that obviously clouds her vision a bit. Like, you don't know Joel's entire history, right? Like, I think if you asked one of us, like, did Joel kind of get what was coming to him? I would probably say yeah. Like, no one deserves that, of
Yeah,
course.
I mean,
But
Dina was knocked out during that entire speech that Abby gave to him before she absolutely laid a beatdown on him.
exactly, and so, Dina just doesn't necessarily know every single thing that Joel has done, and so her saying, like, "No one deserves that," and that's partly why she is on this trip with Ellie and willing to put herself in harm's way, and now, on top of that, she's pregnant, right? And so having gosh, being Ellie's whole mindset is being ripped in two, right? Where she is, like, dead set on offing Abby and the WLF while also being really torn about having Dina on this trip at all. She's in extreme danger at all times, but I also think there is, because we have these characters who are extremely morally complex, I think there's a part of Ellie that knows doing this trip alone really isn't possible,
Mhm.
specifically without Dina. Like, she can't triangulate. She doesn't even know what that means. She knows it involves triangles, right? Like, she is not the person who is able to, like, listen to everything happening on the radio and map out all the locations of every person. She wasn't I forget, what is it, how does Dina phrase it, like, school brained or
Mhm.
school oriented? Like, that is not who Ellie is. And so obviously she's probably also thinking, without Dina, this trip will probably fail. I won't succeed in my goal. So, how does she choose between protecting Dina, who is newly pregnant and can't even look at a dead body without vomiting, which seems like a bit of a liability, in the battlefield.
Or
Um
it could be used as a nice, quite literal projectile weapon if need be. Of
oh
like,
god.
just imagine if like some of the wolves get a hold of her and she just like barfs all over. They're like, oh god, naturally recoil. That's a good getaway plan.
It's true. Cover the spores in vomit. They won't know where to reach.
Exactly, exactly. Well, you mentioned Jesse. Let's talk about this factor that gets introduced. I was greatly surprised by this. I had called a couple weeks ago. I'm like, well, Gabriel Luna and Young Mazzino are still in the main credits, so I guess we got to see some stuff back at Jackson, right? And listen, we'll talk about the ending. Maybe that is the case in a very different way than I thought, but no. It seems just like one day later they snuck out as well. I don't know if Seth helped them too. If this guy is just like, really put advertising himself as like, I'm your way out of Jackson, as long as you have a good reason for doing it. But I think what's interesting about Jesse, and obviously it's something that we'll get into from a like love triangle perspective, though I hope they don't go too like hackneyed and trite with it. I imagine the show won't. It's better than that. But I think what Jesse also represents is this sort of like harsh dose of reality coming in to kind of break the fantastical bubble that, yes, these two were just trying to outrun a bunch of quote unquote smart infected and got cornered. But at the same time, when Jesse comes in, he's basically like chiding them, being like, okay, show's over. You had your fun. You thought you were doing well until I had to come in and save you. Now we're going back home. And I think obviously Ellie has been in the throes of like sort of this from at least from a relationship perspective, this sort of dream of hers that like, she finally gets a chance to be with Dina and Dina says that she loves her, and now it's Jesse coming in sort of waking her up from said dream, at least initially, to be like, no, 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 we're going back to Jackson and everything will go back to the way it was before, which is not music to Ellie's ears, to say the least.
Certainly, it's tough, right? He's on the council, as is Tommy. Both of them have a vested interest in both Dina and Ellie being out in danger. And this is really going to complicate things because not only is Jesse, like we said, this kind of lawful neutral character, but on top of that, Dena is pregnant with his child. He doesn't know that yet. How do you think he's going to react if, when he finds out about this? He's going to be even more adamant that they turn around and go back home. And so there's just, it's a really, and I wonder if that is part of Ellie's calculation as well. If
Mm.
she's even calculating anything,
Well, we
honestly.
know that she's not good at math.
Yeah. I think part of that is, this is my chance, because Jesse has now taken an injured Dina back to the theater, right? Dina gets shot in the leg with an arrow. We'll talk about the Seraphites of it all. And Ellie's probably thinking, this is my one chance, because the moment I go back to the theater, Dina is injured. Jesse's going to be even more adamant we return to Jackson after we find Tommy wherever he is. And this is my chance to actually get to Nora and make an impact, right? Without the devil, the angel on my shoulder, kind of like whispering to stop. So, yeah, Jesse certainly complicates things, but I think it's really, I think we can say with certainty, Mike, that like, yeah, they weren't getting out of that stalker situation if
Mhm.
not for Jesse showing up, because I don't know. I'm just thinking about Tess's advice from season 1, Mike, of, yeah, maybe you can't get infected, Ellie, but you can certainly still get torn to shreds.
Right.
Like, you're not immune from being ripped apart, And that certainly seemed like where we were headed before Jesse showed up.
Well, I was even thinking about that during the last segment at the hospital when they're all like, when basically Nora runs through a la Muldoon, shoot her, and like, yeah, she could
Mhm.
easily just get picked off amongst all the bullets that are flying, and that's the odd double standard that Ellie kind of possesses, is that she thinks she is quite literally immune to probably the most dangerous threat to humanity, but there's still a lot of other threats on that list.
Yep.
And I think actually what this episode does is set that up from multiple regards as well. That through these two characters and Ellie in particular, we are sort of reminded that despite the fact that maybe this is not like all right, it's the WLF has had them cornered as much as they did last week. There's so much other stuff that's encroaching upon them as well that it feels more claustrophobic than you may have thought. And let's go through some of those threats. Let's go back to the Seraphites here because we only see them briefly. And again, what's interesting is that up to this point, with the exception of a couple of arrow riddled bodies, we hadn't seen a lot of like what the Seraphites can do. We've seen a lot of dead Seraphites, including in
Yeah.
this very episode. And so we think, like, as Isaac sort of gloats last week, right? Like, you have sticks and stones, and we will break your bones with our high class machinery. But we could see that hell hath no fury, like a scar scorned. Say that 10 times fast. As we see, as much as what the scar last week gloats of like, yes, your people defect from us so easily, Jess. We realize that the losses of the wolves might not all be defections necessarily. It might just be them all getting gutted and strung up.
Yeah, this is brutal, right? Like, we saw the result of this at the TV station last episode, but to actually watch it happening, where it's very like very culty, like Dina says, very
Yeah.
ritualistic of, oh, you have nested in sin. And they're stringing people up and cutting their entrails out. Like, this is a brutal way to go. And let's not forget that, was it 2 episodes ago, Dina and Ellie were like, "These people are victims, right? They've been
Yeah.
shot in the back by the WLF. They have no idea they've stumbled upon a turf war, like a really, really
Yep.
terrible war between 2 sides that are, again, this is not a case of one is good and one is evil, Like, it's morally gray. And so to then have to witness this firsthand, these people, and I love, oh gosh, this is why I think the show introducing the Seraphites a few episodes ago in the way they did was jarring for some people, because the way we're introduced in the video game is more akin to what we saw in the park in this episode, with the
Mm.
whistling, the tall grass, the like, what is going on? They have torches. Like, again, they're kind of like Dina said, like the
The
Amish of
Amish.
today. Um, which I love. I love her call out
Good
of that,
lord, if
'cause
this is the case, I'm not going to Lancaster anytime soon, personally.
yeah. And so to actually get to see that firsthand is terrifying, and it should be, right? Like, to hear they have different code words and whistles, they're shooting arrows everywhere. Like, yes, it's not as dangerous as a gun maybe, but they still can kill you, and they seem to be pretty accurate with an arrow. So it's I love getting to see more of the Seraphites here because while at first we think they're victims, it's very obvious that like there's this really awful war happening between the Seraphites and the WLF that now Dena and Ellie have inadvertently stumbled upon. And I guess on the bright side, Mike, because the Seraphites are more of the land, more Amish, if you will, they don't use radios, and that's what allows Dena to get all the intel because the
Mhm.
WLF are just cocky enough to think no one's listening. We could say whatever we want. And so that is the nice thing about having a war with folks like the Amish who aren't using technology to their advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I think it speaks to one of the larger themes that we've seen throughout this series, which is this idea of like, we're so focused on battling each other that we forget the threats at hand. Now, in some cases, that is almost always referring to the infected. In this case, it refers to Dena and Ellie, who, again, are able to start sneaking in and really causing some damage because no one's really expecting them to make all their way over to Seattle and drop in the way that they do. And what I really enjoyed about the Seraphite scene, it's odd to say enjoyed when, to your point, we see an entire, basically veritable set of haggis spill out from one of these guys, is the fact that, again, it also speaks to another motif that we've seen throughout the series, which is sort of like people's feelings that it's necessary to sort of like utilize violence for a good cause, right? This idea of like, well, I have to, I mean, as Dina sort of espouses, I had to kill this guy because if I didn't, then this thing would have happened and that would have been bad. So theoretically, me doing this is a good thing. You talk about this culty language. We have, this bald bearded Seraphite leader cutting this guy from tip to tail, basically saying he's nested in sin and essentially trying to like theoretically open him up so that these spirits will get out of him. And now he is free, he says to all the Seraphites that then reply in turn to him that like this is ceremonial and that nobody even bats an eye at this idea of like, aha, yes, the only way we can free the most sinful people is by eviscerating them and making sure that they no longer live. That's the only way we can free them from the shackles that they occupy. It just speaks to how belief systems can make people really go to the brink and even beyond sort of like the moral boundaries that you might think of from a more objective perspective, as long as they feel like they have a good enough reason to do so.
Yeah, people will lean into different things in traumatic situations or difficult situations. And I love that as a part of this world, we're getting to see different factions of what people will lean into, right? So the
Mhm.
Seraphites, it's religion. It's this like this is all happening for a reason. And oh, the prophet has told us to do X, Y, and Z. The WLF, very militant, very if we are controlling of everything, we can control everything in the world and it will all be fine. And Jackson, of course, I think we're supposed to look at as more of a utopia of what like a commune could how it could be successful in this sort of a world. And yeah, it's so interesting that this is, Ellie and Dina's first exposure to this sort of a thing. Again, Ellie traversed across the entire country,
Yeah.
and I didn't come upon anything like this. There's the David stuff, which it maybe is the closest approximation in terms
Mhm.
of like a religion. But yeah, getting to see, Dina looks just destroyed by witnessing this. Obviously, probably on the brink of vomiting as well. But it's really interesting that this isn't even enough to scare Ellie off of what she wants to do, right? Like she
Yeah.
sees this as her opportunity and she seizes that opportunity. And again, people with guns doesn't matter. Ellie is willing to do whatever it takes the minute that she finds out where Nora is, even going up against a threat that she doesn't even know exists, right? In Spores. Something that given how secluded Jackson is and that they stay off of radios, right? Like they just became aware of stalkers, which are, what we see in that big building, the creepy infecteds that are
Yes, the
able to
smart
sneak
smart
upon them.
infected, right, basically?
Yes,
The
exactly. So
school brain infected, Dina would say.
they have tactics and
Yeah, they know how to
they're ready to use
triangulate.
them.
I mean, listen, I saw that one little like hen nod to try to. They got strategy, Jess.
It's velociraptors in
Mm-hmm.
Jurassic Park. That's exactly what it feels like. They're triangulating, they're sicking the prey.
So Ellie could be the Chris Pratt in this variety if she's able to
Why
like
are you
really
doing
calm
that
them
to
down.
her, Mike? Why are you doing that? Don't make her the Chris Pratt. How dare you? Make her the Sadler, you know? Come on.
Yeah, I guess that's
Um
true. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. But yeah, nothing will it's I think it just goes to show that as much as Ellie and Dina think they know about the world that they live in, there's so much that is a mystery to them, so much that they're unaware of. Imagine, Mike, imagine if Dina had gone with Ellie into that hospital. She's dying the way
Mm-hmm.
Nora's dying. Well, maybe not the way Nora's dying, but she's dying from these spores instantly, right? Like it's getting into her lungs and probably killing her. My question for you, Mike, is because I wasn't sure. The
Yes.
very first scene we open with, speaking of spores,
Yes.
right? We get the scene with WLF where this woman who I don't know if you're gonna know.
Hanrahan.
Yeah, Hanrahan, that's right. Hanrahan, she's talking to Parks about, oh, we had this troop going into levels like B1, B2. Turns out there were no infected down there. There were spores. And they knew they were getting infected, so we quarantined them essentially. We
Mm-hmm.
shut it all off. Unfortunately, Park's son Leon is one of those people. It is later on that Ellie and Nora end up in those lower levels of the hospital where all the spores are. Um, do you know? Did you get an idea of like when is the conversation between Hanrahan and Parks versus Ellie and Nora actually traversing that land? Like they
Yeah,
had to have time for all of that to build. No.
it's a great question because I think certainly something that Grace and I talked about last week is like the theory that's been bandied about is Hanrahan, which as a reminder, she's the WLF member that Isaac sort of greets after he ends up killing Josh Peck in the Bro Brigade
Yes.
in the cold open of last week's episode. Like, could she be the prophet? I guess we get an image of the prophet painted on the walls so nicely in this episode. So, I mean, it's still a possibility that this flashback took place like months ago, and since then, Hanrahan has defected and become the prophet. But I would say more realistically, it's been like probably days to weeks because I feel like the lower third would have told us if it was a really significant time
That's
jump, right?
that is exactly where my mind was going because we didn't get anything on the screen to indicate how much time had passed. I had just assumed that it hadn't been that much time, but it was like the buildup of spores that was down there, right? Like the condition that Leon and that other guy were in by the time Ellie gets down there. That takes time to do all of that. So yeah, I'm with you and Grace on I was, I guess, last week on with Hanrahan potentially actually being the prophet, being that she's the only like unidentified woman that we
Mm-hmm.
know of that could potentially be the prophet. But yeah, I guess I was just a little confused. I'm happy to know I wasn't the only one. And like I feel like if it was a significant amount of time that had passed, I would wish we got something on the screen to
Yeah.
indicate that. Just because again, like usually when we see the buildup of spores, especially in the video game, this is way more commonplace. The covering the walls and everything like that. Usually it indicates a fair amount of time has passed.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will say by the time Ellie catches up to Nora, she seems to be affected already, right? She's already
Yeah.
coughing, sputtering from the spores in the air. So maybe it doesn't take that much time for
Yeah,
it to spread.
they might just stumbled upon like a really overgrown section of the hospital, and so it's almost instantaneous in that regard. But yeah, let's get more into spores because God, Jess, I love being wrong so much. I love that last week, Grace got to introduce this great thing from the video games that like, well, this whole fungal underground network with like the roots reaching out, that's new to the show. In the video game, it was just spores, and that's how Dina can find out that Ellie actually
Mhm.
is immune to everything. And so we thought we were done with spores, but it turns out that no, we just had to wait like a week to germinate in a manner of speaking, as this turns out to be alongside the stalkers. One of the bigger threats hitting Seattle, at least, is this idea of okay, this shit is now airborne. It's not a matter of just outrunning the infected, out strategizing them. And not only have they become smarter, but now the very thing you take in to live could possibly turn you into an infected without a bite, without a wound, etc., which is, incredibly mortifying. And this poor woman sees it firsthand when she has to essentially like seal away her own son and sacrifice him alongside a bunch of soldiers. And it's again a really great reminder, Jess, that as much as these people might be fighting back and forth over belief systems and turf battles and who killed whose family first, there still is like a raging fungal infection that is out there that is absolutely terrifying. And now it takes a brand new form that, yes, Ellie can be immune to, and it leads her to be even more badass in this scene that we'll get into. But give me your thoughts on this. Were you sort of alongside Grace of like thinking spores wouldn't be introduced and then being surprised that they came back in, or for you was a matter of when, not if, that they were brought into the canon of the show?
Definitely the latter, mostly because we got the a little snippet of the Leon kind of doing the super badass smoke circles, but with spores, in one of the trailers. So I
Mm,
knew we would get airborne spores. I personally thought it would be before the Ellie reveal to Dena of immunity because, like you said, in the game that is how it's done with the masks and you know I didn't before season 2 though, I didn't expect them to bring airborne spores into the canon of the show because they had instead done the whole, oh, spores can, speak to each other over
right.
miles and miles, and I thought we were just going to go that route instead. I don't mind the airborne spores being a part of this universe though. It just makes things even more complicated because now you have another thing you have to worry about, another threat that you weren't even aware of. And how easy do you think it's going to be to find like gas masks in this world, right? It's mostly
Hmm.
just going to be about avoidance at this point. So I'm really happy to see it as a part of the show, mostly because the cinematography is just
Oh,
beautiful. It's
so good.
disgusting. It's beautiful, right? Like the way they shot it with the light from behind as he's like puffing out these spore circles.
Yeah,
It's
ripping
just
those sick
incredible.
clouds. I mean, you could argue
Yeah.
that like this is the ultimate hot box, right? Is B2.
Yes. Yeah. And so it's beautiful. I'm so happy it's a part of the show. My question is, okay, now what are they going to do with it? You know what I mean? Because I
Right.
think if you introduce this threat like stalkers in the premiere of this season, well, you have to do more with the spores then eventually, right? Like they're probably going to do something with it later on. I just I'm happy it's even canon in the show, even if it's just for this one scene, just because of how beautiful and breathtaking, literally, I guess, these scenes are.
Yeah, I think that the way I see it going is akin to the Kathleen Kansas City arc in season 1, which
Mhm.
was very similar in that it's like, "Hey, boss, there's this big underground infected threat that's looming." She's like, "Never mind that. I've got to deal with my revenge against this one boy and his brother." And she ends up paying the price for it when it leads to this big battle where the bloater emerges and tears her limb from limb. I could imagine something similar here where I think Hanrahan is obviously taking this as a much more legitimate threat. But at the same time, she mentions Isaac isn't in this episode because he's dealing with the turf war at the border. I think they're going to be focused a lot more on the living, breathing enemies in front of them now that especially Ellie has entered the picture. And in the process of breathing, they are going to be taking in a lot of these spores. So I think it's tough because we only have 2 episodes left. We'll talk about this later. My assumption is that next episode is going to be at least chiefly, if not entirely, dedicated to some sort of flashback
Yeah.
with Joel and Ellie. So really, at the best, it's 1 episode and change to like have this emerge. I would not be surprised if we don't really see spores become a main thing until season 3. And this was the way to kind of like sprinkle it in, let us breathe it in as an audience, and then slowly we'll start turning by the time season 3 rolls around and it truly becomes a credible threat.
I completely agree. I think we could look at it similarly to how we saw the network of spores, communicating. That's not always relevant, but when it is, it's a really scary threat. And I could see the spores being something very similar. And again, like when Dena, Ellie, and Jesse return to Jackson, hopefully with Tommy in tow, they'll be able to say, hey, we have another threat. Now, we don't really know what state Jackson will be in,
Yeah.
considering we saw
Well,
spores coming out of
Colorado,
the
most
pipes.
likely, or Wyoming.
Yeah, it's true. But like the spores coming out of the pipes, right? Like that is still a threat for another day, another episode that we haven't seen really, and especially knowing that Tommy and Jesse left Jackson with that being a threat, with them just having been attacked. So we'll return to that threat later, but I think the spore setup is mostly just okay, we're going to put this down here, leave it for a while, let it germinate, and we'll return to it in season 3 and address it more then.
I don't know. I mean, also, we could see a situation where Ellie returns from her little trip to the hospital, comes back to the theater, and even though, again, she's immune, as we discovered all too well with our own sort of airborne pandemic, she could possibly be a vector. You
Yeah,
know,
Ellie, put a
like
mask on, okay? 6 feet, please. Please.
exactly. Like there's a chance that if there was some stuff that sort of had been held in sort of her own system that didn't affect her, but she ends up breathing it out in the same space, the other two might not be so lucky. But let's talk about someone who definitely was not so lucky in the form of Nora. First off, gotta clock the puka shell necklace, just
What
like
is happening? Okay, I've talked about this on our own podcast because Jesse has a very like Sean Hunter-esque from Boy Meets World, like
mm-hmm.
floppy 90s
Yep.
haircut. Now we're bringing back shell necklaces from the 90s and early aughts. Like, did we just pause all the fashion styles in the 90s and like never move on from them? Because this
They had
was a
bigger fish
choice.
to fry, Jess. Like, yeah, they had to deal with Survivor. It doesn't matter what clothes on the back. That's the other thing as well, is like, if they had to work with what they've got, they had to raid every like limited 2 that was around them, right? Every 5 leads to be like, well, shit, okay, if it's going naked or it's wearing the classic long sleeve shirt underneath the short sleeve shirt, I guess I'll double layer it. So yeah, nice little fun shout out to the early aughts there with Nora rocking the puka shell necklace, though it did not protect her from anything, really. It was just a nice stylish
No.
thing to be around her neck as it's choking the life out of her.
No, I love this is probably like my favorite sequence of the episode. It's incredible, right? We get Ellie chasing Nora, and no, this is I think we could see some of Ellie's faults coming through here, right? Instead of just killing Nora, or at the very least taking her out so she isn't able to escape, she is so determined to find out Abby's location, and to not just find out Abby's location, but I feel like she's also getting some vengeance on Nora as
Oh yeah.
well, in terms of, well, you tortured Joel, so I'm gonna torture you. Um, Gosh, the scene where she looks back, I think it's no surprise I'm going to draw parallels here to Ellie looking back and seeing that pipe that she's going to grab, and Abby looking and seeing a golf club she's
Yep.
going to grab, right? Like, we're supposed to be drawing comparisons between these two characters. Yeah, I love that they didn't shy away from having Ellie be kind of villainous, right? Like, we certainly, you could argue whether or not Joel deserved, what he got, if he had it coming or not. But I think we would all say that like watching it happen is really difficult, and like it was too much. It was too much for anyone to have to endure. And so seeing Ellie kind of do something similar to what Abby did, I think we're supposed to be questioning, like, is she a good guy? Like, are we rooting for a bad guy? What's happening?
Well, I think also the biggest shocker for me was the fact that Nora, in her last throes of life, is going to try to de-escalate the situation by almost escalating Ellie's temper by being like, okay, you don't know this. This is the big thing that Joel did. He killed the only person that would have found a cure in this world, which I don't remember if that got confirmed to us just previously, that like Abby's dad was also the doctor that was solely responsible for the cure to the fungal infection.
Yeah,
But
I think it was implied at the very least.
I think they gotta get some better medical training. Then, like, redundancy helped people, backups on backups. But she says, like, look at what this guy did. Don't you understand now why we had to do it? And Ellie just lowers her gun, realizing that, oh, she doesn't need to shoot her because not only is she keeling over, but like she really wants to make it hurt. And she just tells her, I know. And I got chills, not only from Bella Ramsey's performance, which is
Oh, so
absolutely
good.
maniacal and feral thereafter, where, Ellie is just consistently asking, Where's Abby? Where's Abby? And just her eyes are wide, yet like with nothing behind them as she just mercilessly goes to town on Nora. But it then sets up a lot of questions as to, okay, so we know that Ellie knows. Does Joel know that Ellie knows? Did Ellie find out by herself? Did she assume via some like logical loopholes given a lot of the holes that could emerge in Joel's story? If Joel did tell her, how does that manifest in the relationship that we saw them have? Is it something that could have been found out in that night in between New Year's Eve and the death of Joel? And if so, how does Ellie feel about it now? Is it that no matter what he did, she was still her dad, and so she's going to get her revenge? Or is it something that, like, she has sort of now written off as, like, almost being on Team Joel of, like, well, he did what was best in keeping me alive, so I don't care anymore? I just was so happily taken aback by it because we were all waiting for that shoe to drop of, like, when Ellie finds out about the big lie, how is she going to react? And then, at least in the moment, to have that moment happen off screen was so awesome because then it almost doesn't matter, right? All that matters is what is filling Ellie at this moment, which is white hot rage.
Right. It's a really fun reveal for anyone who hasn't played the video game to get like, yeah, Ellie knows. But like how does she know? When does she know? How does she come upon this information? Is it just this gut feeling because of, when Joel lied to her at the end of last season? It's really incredible, and again, you saying, the nothingness behind Ellie's eyes, it is so reminiscent of Joel in the hospital
Yep.
with just this, like, soldier-like, just, cognitive dissonance. He
And I
just
mean, for lack of a better term, it
compartmentalizes.
was video gamey, right? To have Joel, like, they give the stats a couple episodes ago of like how many people he just mowed down. I mean,
Yeah.
it's more 1v1 here, I guess 1v0, considering Nora's not really fighting back. But like Ellie, I don't know, it felt like I was pressing the X button to just wield the pipe every time that Ellie was bringing it down onto Nora.
Yeah, it's really incredible, and, like, the way gosh, the way they do it, I'm glad they didn't shy away from it,
Mm,
because there's a way in which they could have had, Ellie smacks Nora with the pipe and we change scenes, like, on that moment, right? Like,
yeah.
we could have shied away from showing the actual violence of it and just how much rage Ellie has, and I'm glad we didn't because this is part of who Ellie is. This is a piece of her as a character is this like she grew up on violence. And I think like right Gail has talked about the path that Ellie
Yep.
was on and walking side by side on this path with Joel, that Joel didn't put her on this path. She was already on it since birth. And so I'm glad that we're not shying away from just how brutal Ellie can be because I think it's helping and humanizing Abby a bit more, which I do think is extremely important considering like we haven't seen Abby in a few
Nope.
episodes now. And so like you don't want the audience to forget Abby, who Abby is as a character and what her motivations were for doing what she did to Joel and getting to see Ellie have just as much violence as Abby does in those moments. I think is really important in terms of like yes, we love Ellie. We love Bella Ramsey. My
Hmm.
gosh, we love Bella Ramsey. But we need to remember that like all of these characters have deep, deep flaws and that they're gonna come out, especially when the path that you are dead set on is one of revenge. It's not gonna be a clean path, right? Like people are gonna die. And Nora, I think is it's a super interesting character because she is held at gunpoint by someone who very much obviously looks fueled with rage and still is like, he deserved it,
Yeah.
throws, I
She'll
don't know,
she'll literally
acid,
she'll
whatever it is in
bleach. I
Ellie's
think she was
face, the
she
bleach.
bleach, yeah, because she was washing the bloodstained clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she with her last dying breaths, refuses to give up Abby's location. Like, she firmly believes in what Abby did and doesn't necessarily, again, much like Ellie doesn't necessarily see the other side of things of where Abby's coming from and her own revenge against her father. I don't think necessarily draws the parallels and is like, yeah, screw you, Ellie. She literally says the little bitch got what he deserved.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because she can say that and also say, "I still hear his, like, screams in my sleep," and, like, knowing we saw the looks on
Yeah,
the Salt
but
Lake
the
Crew's
parenthetical on that
face.
sentence though was, and it helps me sleep better at night. That's my melatonin or the screams of Joel.
Yes. It's just I think that they can all agree that, like, it could be true that both he got what he deserved and also it was far too much, and, like, I wish Abby had just shot him versus, like, torturing him with a golf club and all these other implements, over an extended period of time. But, yeah, Nora is such an interesting character, and I was so oh my god, the red light in that scene, like, everything was so perfect. I just yeah, credit to Bella Ramsey just for being an icon. She's truly just like the acting chops. The other thing that I wanted to mention quickly, in terms of the eye acting from Bella Ramsey,
Mm.
when Dena is telling Ellie about, the first person she killed, and they're kind of having that entire discussion, the look in Bella Ramsey's eyes of like exhaustion mixed with just like fear for Dena, right? Like
Mhm.
it is so well done, and to go from that to then this just blank look of rage almost in the Nora scene, just 10 out of 10. Anyone who's like, "Oh, Bella Ramsey doesn't look enough like Ellie," get out of here. Get out of here. Because they're incredible in this role, and we all
Oh,
know it.
yeah, I absolutely loved it, and the fact that at the end of all this, Nora was going to die already. Ellie had chased her down, which is also very fun considering how we sort of pair like the stalker situation with them rabidly pursuing Ellie and Dena, and also Ellie getting chased by the WLF and Ellie getting chased by the Seraphites to now her doing the chasing and her becoming the predator instead of the prey. But like, Nora was down there. Nora's already hacking up a lung. She was going to become, adhered to the wall fairly soon. But that maneuver with the pipe was all for Ellie, right? It was all not only trying to make her suffer the way that Joel did, even though Ellie was not necessarily around for that, but it was Ellie's way to get her own pound of flesh of like, no, 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 no. This thing will not kill you. I want you to know that I was the one to deliver the killing blow.
Mhm.
What I find intriguing about this from a plot perspective is that, again, and this might not be in the games, I'm not entirely sure, but this does feel a little video game to me of like mini bosses of like, I
Mhm.
do wonder if I imagine we're not going to be killing off everyone in the WLF, all these named characters in the rest of season 2, considering again we only have a couple episodes left. But I wonder if season season 3 and I don't know, maybe even 4 depending on how the plot is, will be these sort of like 1v1 showdowns where Ellie is able to get her revenge and cross the name off the list. And that in turn at least allows us to get to know these sort of like faceless WLF people a little bit more as part of like the Jackson crew in a manner of speaking. Do you anticipate that happening? That the way that this Nora death happened is sort of a harbinger of how we're going to handle this type of stuff on Ellie's revenge tour?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because I think this specific death happens the way it does because Ellie is alone. I
Mm,
think if she had Dena and or Jesse with her, thinking about how the Salt Lake Crew stuff happened with Abby, it's possible they're like, "Come on, Ellie, like let's go, like hurry it up, like let's not prolong this." I think Ellie being on her own is what allows her to kind of go as far as she does with
mm,
torturing Nora, I think is probably the correct word for it. So I don't know that we'll get the same treatment for every single member of that crew if Ellie isn't alone. I think she wouldn't necessarily be able to go to the extent that she does
mm,
if she has other people around her, both because they might talk her out of it and also because maybe she squashes some of those impulses that she has if she's around other people. Specifically, I'm thinking like Jesse is not someone who's going to allow this to happen, right? Like, he's such a, as much as I love him, he is such a bit like a rule follower, right?
Whoa,
Like,
whoa. Let's submit some paperwork here, okay? We need to file a formal request for an
exactly.
execution.
Exactly. Put her in handcuffs. Like, let's do this the proper way. So I don't know. It's really interesting to think about what could happen. I certainly would imagine that Abby has this coming, right? Like, of all of the people left, Abby could be the one that is going to suffer a similar fate to Nora. Some of the other members, I don't know, especially because we did see when Joel is being tortured and killed, they're exchanging looks like, "This is too much. Like,
Well,
this has gone
except
too
for
far."
that one douche. That one guy. I
Oh,
even forgot his name.
Manny
Manny, I think it's Manny, the guy that was at
with
the
the
top of
scar.
the Space Needle last episode.
Yeah, he's a jerk. That Manny. But yeah, people like, Mel, we don't know, right? We don't know their thoughts on everything. We certainly haven't seen them in quite a number of episodes. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of that shakes out with Ellie returning to Dena and Jesse, presumably. But we're not going there first, Mike,
No,
by the
yeah,
way the
Jess,
episode ends.
let's talk about not where we're going, but when. As we end, quite a brutal scene down in the basement of the hospital to a much brighter, happier place. An unnamed time, though it is a time that's at least a few weeks back, considering that Joel is still alive in this scene. As we see him knock on the door, he gives a simple, "Hey, kiddo." She wakes up all smiles, saying hi. So, also, again, maybe putting this at least a significant amount of time back, considering that she's not giving some sort of snarky reply. And so, again, my assumption is that this is going to be setting up at least a mostly flashback filled episode next week. I think what my assumption is of what this is setting up is that the fact that we're doing this and we're ending on this right after we get the revelation that Ellie knows what Joel did, I think that is going to be like the thing we'll get to next episode. And maybe there'll be some other details of the past that will get filled in. Maybe we'll get them going back to Jackson, we'll go all the way back like 5 years ago or so. But I think at the very least, we are going to find out how Ellie found out and how that is going to inspire the way that she feels right now about Joel's loss and how it might be a bit different than we initially thought, given the fact that we had assumed, as did Gail, that the very last time they'd interacted was that kerfuffle at the New Year's Eve dance.
Yeah, they're certainly setting us up for a flashback heavy episode, especially considering, like you said, Ellie isn't even living in the garage in the scene that
Yeah.
we leave off in. She's still living with Joel in the house. So we're going back like a decent amount of time in the past. So I'm really excited for next episode. I've seen some of the stuff from the trailer that I know is pulled straight from the video game. Obviously, this means we're getting Pedro Pascal back on our screens, which of
Mm-hmm.
course is always exciting. And yeah, I think this is going to inform a lot of how Ellie is feeling and what's going on in her head, leading us into the finale, which is wild to even say that we are this close to the finale. It's coming. I think this episode that we're presuming is very flashback oriented is coming at an interesting time in the
Mm-hmm.
season, having it be the penultimate. I'm a little dubious on, like, I think it could work. I think it can work. I just think, like, man, we are really halting we're halting the forward momentum, if you will, in a shortened season, like, I could do 10 episodes of this show. I
Oh,
could
yeah.
I could I could go for 10. But I'm excited because, again, like, I know some of the stuff because of trailers, and I this is probably my most anticipated episode. Well, beyond episode 2 for
I was going to
obvious
say.
reasons. For obvious reasons. This is my most, like, I'm excited to watch this episode versus I'm, like, gripped with fear and anxiety to watch this episode.
Yeah, I mean, I'll have more of a concrete statement about this next week after we know exactly what the composition of episode 6 is. But I would hazard a guess that I think for people's anticipation of the finale of season 2 to not necessarily plan for a lot of finality. I'm thinking back to like Squid Game season 2, where they very clearly
Yeah.
knew that there was going to be a season 3. And so theoretically, this is something that Chappelle and I almost talked about, that it's like kind of stretching one season across two batches, there is a very fair chance that they did that with The Last of Us season 2 into season 3. And so as a result, there's not going to be like any huge, massive, cataclysmic cliffhangery events that sets up season 3, but it's more so like akin to a mid-season cliffhanger where it's like, oh, there's some interesting stuff that's going on here and some eventfulness, but nothing to necessarily make it feel like, okay, this is a definitive endpoint between seasons 2 and 3. And so by proxy, I was not completely surprised in my assumption that this would be a bit of a trip off the beaten path for not the beaten Nora in episode 6, because if they're looking more so at the long game of this being what, a 2, maybe even 3 episode arc of covering the game, it could make sense in the long scheme of things to take a little bit of a detour. But Jess, before we take a detour straight to the end of this podcast, any other things you want to bring up from this episode, looking back, looking ahead to The Last of Us to come?
No, I think the one major thing that we didn't spend too much time on, but it just is so important, is Ellie and the guitar and the "if I ever were to lose you" moment. I was really happy that we got it. It's a very small moment, but I
Mm-hmm.
was so happy they included it because I think it helps you realize like how stuck Ellie's brain is, how one track it is, that like Joel, right?
Yep.
Joel's death. I think it really brings us back to that. So just the settings as well, like the theater, it was so true to the video game and so gorgeous. I was so happy to see it. Like they're doing an incredible job with the set decorations and just
Mm-hmm.
putting us in those in that world. So I just wanted to shout out that because it is a small thing, but like incredibly important. Yeah, Take on Me just simply wasn't enough last episode. I needed more of Ellie with the guitar.
Well, your thoughts came out in an even flow this podcast. Thank you so much for swinging in, substituting for Grace. So great to hear your thoughts not only on this episode, but your thoughts on season 2 overall and how it plays into that. Had such a great time getting to talk all of this through. Of course, if people want to check out all of your thoughts on The Last of Us every week, they certainly can. Do you want to plug that for the listeners as well as anything else you got going on?
Yeah, go check us out. Look for the light. My friend and I, Stuart, we take a real deep dive into the show, into the episode. We also talk through video game spoilers towards the end of the podcast. If so, either way, whether you've seen it or played the video game or not, something for you to enjoy. So go check out Look for the Light podcast. And then yeah, other than that, you could always find me on Shit 90 Shows Taught Me, where my friend Sarah and I cover Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Felicity. We're in season 4 of both of those shows, and neither of us are spoiled on either of them, which in
Oh,
this day and age seems kind of wild to not be spoiled on Buffy, but every time we hit a new point of like something crazy happening, it's very exciting for both of us. So go check out that podcast. And then if you're looking for something a little bit lighter, a little bit like not so doom and gloom, check out Talkin' Shit. And that's SCHITT, which is our Schitt's Creek podcast where Stuart and I are watching the really lovely Canadian sitcom Schitt's Creek. And that is much more, you need something to brighten up your day, maybe not
hmm.
so doom and gloom. That's Talking Shit. So yeah, that's what I got going on, Mike.
Well, this bloom will continue to bring the doom and gloom here every week on We Know The Last of Us. And I will say, Jess, I imagine that Shit 90 show taught me. Maybe it's just like had so much puka shell necklaces flagged in your brain that the second you saw one on Nora, you just instantly threw your mind back into, is this an episode of Buffy that I just didn't realize that
Yeah,
went really, really
seriously.
heavy?
Yeah, it really, I couldn't, as soon as I saw the puka shell necklace, like took me out of the scene for a minute because I'm like, excuse me? What is around your neck right now, ma'am? Yeah.
Well, we had a shell of a time getting to talk through this episode, but what are your thoughts about it? What did you think about a lot of the revelations that came out in this episode? Be it, Dina's first kill, Ellie revealing that she didn't know about what Joel did. Do you anticipate that we're going to be hanging out in the past with Pedro Pascal for the foreseeable future? And how do you think this whole shebang will end in just a couple of weeks? Feel free to let us know in the comments on the YouTube channel, on social media as well. And regardless of what happens, Grace and I will be back next week, Sunday night, covering the penultimate episode, believe it or not, of The Last of Us Season 2. Thank you all, as always, so much for listening. Jess, thank you for coming in and sprinkling your words of wisdom like spores. Happy to breathe them in and, truly get to digest every great nugget that you brought in here. Grace and I'll be back next week covering episode 6 of The Last of Us Season 2. Until then, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.